Welcome to Talent Unfiltered, located at the intersection of innovation and all things talent. Talent Unfiltered is presented by HireWorks. HireWorks, talent forward. Now, here is your host, Ron Godier.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talent Unfiltered, presented by HireWorks. I am Ron Godier, coming to you from Chicago as usual. You are looking at Boston, Massachusetts, which is a town that I have a great deal of love for. Spent a lot of time up there, have a lot of friends in that area. It also happens to be where our guest today calls home. He is Jared Correia, founder of Red Cave Law Consulting, also the founder of Gideon Software, and he has an amazing podcast called the Legal Toolkit Podcast, which is hosted on the Legal Talk Network. Wherever you are, I hope that you are safe, happy, and healthy, at least as much as you can be during these times. Now, here in Chicago, the weather has really started to change. It's definitely fall. In fact, we have snow in our forecast for today. Don't know if we'll actually get that because the high is supposed to be around 40, but it is a signal that things are changing in this area. It's also Halloween week, and I think Halloween is going to be a much different experience for everybody, especially, for kids who look forward to this kind of thing than it has been in years past. I don't want to spend too much time on COVID because I think everybody has a certain level of fatigue when it comes to this particular topic. We've been bombarded with this for months and months and months, regardless of which side of the fence you're on politically. I think we can all agree that we're all just tired of the pandemic and maybe in some ways tired of 2020. We only have a few weeks left in the year, 8 weeks or so, 10 weeks. And what I would say is there are a few things I would ask you to do. Cases are on the rise. There's just no way around that. So keep practicing the things that we have done so far in this year. Wear a mask, wash your hands, socially distance, use hand sanitizer when you can. Those things are important because the winter has the potential, I'm not saying it will, but it has the potential to be a very challenging winter for us if we all don't take this very seriously, not just for ourselves, but for the people around us, especially those that are vulnerable. The second thing I would ask you to do is vote. Now, I don't personally care who you support. If you support the president, great. I respect your right and your belief to do that. If you support the challenger, the vice president, great. I respect your right to do that. What I will say is that I think so often in our country, we don't exercise the right that we have to vote and to have our voices heard. And I know we hear all the time that it doesn't matter. My vote may not count. Well, I think we learned, regardless of who you voted for last time, that every vote matters. So get out, vote, exercise that constitutional right. Now, before we get going, I want to make sure that we take a minute to remind you that you can connect with the show on Twitter, on Instagram, and on Facebook. The show is available on Spotify, on Buzzsprout, and on Soundcloud, and there is a video version, which some of you are watching right now on YouTube. All you need to do is go to any one of those channels and search Talent Unfiltered, and you will find us. You can also email the show, if you like, at showinfo@talentunfiltered.com. And if you like what we do, for goodness sakes, click the subscribe button. Like, subscribe, and share to all the people who you think may have some interest in what we do here. Now, let's get to it. Our guest today is Jared Correia. As I mentioned, he is the founder of Red Cave Law Consulting, of Gideon Software. And Gideon Software helps law firms become more efficient, more effective, and provides them the chance to have a more frictionless, user-friendly experience when people are engaging attorneys. And he joins us now. Hey, Jared, how you doing, man? Thanks so much for taking time to join us today. It is so good to see you virtually. I know we talked the other day, but I think the last time I actually saw you in person, in the flesh, was at the ABA Legal Tech Show here in Chicago, man. How have you been?
Right. I've been good. I think that was 2019 that we last spoke in person.
You know what? I think
it feels like.
I think it was actually before that. I think
Was it 2018?
might have been 2018. Yeah.
Man, it feels like I haven't talked to anybody since 2018. It's been that long.
Weird. Isn't it weird?
Yeah.
It's the most
Strange
bizarre,
times.
It's the most bizarre thing, man. Like all of a sudden, my home office and my studio and everything, that's kind of the interaction I get, you know. There's just like I do 1,000 Zoom meetings a day, which anybody who doesn't knows it's just exhausting. Like it's just
Fatigue is real, man.
It is. It's the struggle is real, right? Like I don't want to co-opt phrases like that under times of social unrest, but at the same time, it is a first world problem. That is for sure. So, hey man, thanks again. How's family? Everybody safe and doing well?
Yeah, everybody's good. We're just a little bit bored, right? Ready to get out and travel again.
No, I hear you. I hear you. The girlfriend and I were talking about this, and the minute somebody like rolls away the cave rock and we can go, we're heading to like Florida. Just done with it, man. So
we had a European trip booked for March of 2020. Yeah, so we're like raring to go.
I bet. Well, thanks again for taking time, man. So
my pleasure.
As I mentioned, you and I used to dance in some of the same circles. I mentioned as I was coming in that I spent almost a decade in the legal services industry, and you and I know a lot of the same people. And I was fortunate enough to meet you, I think 5-6 years ago, something like that. And I'm very grateful for the introduction, because you're somebody in that space that I think has their thumb on the pulse of what's going on, not just with small law firms, solos, but with the larger law firms as well. And I want to spend some time today kind of talking about the future of law, where we go, how we get there, what work looks like in that future. So I'm going to kick this off with a couple of questions for you. So first up, legal technology. You and I have spent a lot of time talking about that. And legal tech has really changed the process of the practice of law, both at small law firms and at larger law firms. And what I'd like to know from your vantage point is exactly how has technology changed that practice for our viewers out there who may not be as familiar with those of our audience who are attorneys or partners in larger law firms. How has technology changed the game?
Yeah, I mean, I think really over the last decade plus, like maybe the last 12 years or so, the cloud has really changed things for lawyers. Around 08, 09 was when cloud technology really started to move into legal, like Clio launched around that time. Rocket Matter did as well. Those were the first two like exclusively cloud-based case management softwares. And so that's added a number of different things that law firms can do that they couldn't do before, right? There's tons more mobility available using cloud services, lots more flexibility. And then you've got this interoperability, right? So all of these services can now integrate with each other, whereas they couldn't before. So instead of being able to work in like one software and have access to information from others, you had like a wholly siloed infrastructure for law firms. So now it's just it's just easier to move around, right? The other thing I like about the cloud is it kind of promotes digital processes, distributed workforce management. And like, that's pretty essential right now, as we know. I feel like when people are always like, what's changed for you and the people you work with? I'm like, nothing, because these people are all virtual. I've been virtual for a long, long time. So my work process has not changed at all since the pandemic hit. Other stuff is a hassle, right? Like we just talked about, I can't travel, right? I like to travel, can't do that anymore. But as far as work is concerned, like it's largely been the same. So when people are talking to me about the new normal in terms of work, I'm like, for me, there's a new normal, which is like you can't do the things you used to do in your life, but the work stuff is totally the same. And so when I tell lawyers, and I'm talking about them now, and I'm like, look, if you're not like cloud ready at this point, you missed about like 10 years ago. And if you're not starting to do that now as a law firm, what are you waiting for? Like there's a global pandemic. Are you waiting for like an actual asteroid strike to happen before you make the change?
I don't need anything more in 2020. So please, knock on wood.
Right? No.
Like I've had enough. 2020's been enough already. I'm good.
But I think the one thing that's interesting is that so you had this wave of productivity software that people started developing from like 2008 to 2018. So people were like, hey, like legal productivity software, legal case management software. Great idea. Let's build 400 of those softwares. And like nobody did anything else.
Mhm. Yeah.
So now what I'm seeing is like you're seeing a lot of marketing technologies come out for legal. And I think that's influenced by the pandemic as well, right? Because you've got lawyers who have traditionally relied on in-person referrals, in-person intake. So they're figuring out like, how do I change an analog process to a digital process?
Mhm.
And it makes complete sense to me that marketing technology is the next thing to come along. And I kind of view that as like the second wave of modern legal technology. And that'll probably be happening over the course of like the next 10 years. So
let me kind of interject there.
yeah,
So
yeah,
one of the things that you and I actually, the last time we were at the ABA Tech Show here in Chicago, and I got to know the folks over at Abacus, right?
right. Yeah,
And looking at how they were approaching things, where they had almost like different modules of pieces of their business, takes me back to when SAP was all the rage and everybody wanted to break their business into modules. And it leads me
yeah,
to believe that legal, in my experience, and I could be way wrong here, but legal, in my experience, are traditionally, particularly in smaller firms, they tend to be late adopters. They tend to be
oh,
risk
absolutely.
averse, right? And so
The latest of late adopters.
sure. And so when we look at it, when we're talking about digital transformation from the HireWorks perspective, and we're talking to, to one of our larger CPG clients or a large insurance company, they're already thinking ahead in how to do this.
Yeah.
When you talk to these law firms, how do you get them over that hump of safety and security that the cloud probably drills into their head, right? Because if they're 10 years behind, they're thinking about the cloud from 10 years ago and not what it is today,
Right.
right?
Right. It's totally true. They're like, what's this new thing that people are talking about? The internet? I'm
Yeah.
like, yeah, let
Oh,
me tell you about
yeah.
the internet.
Didn't Al Gore invent that or something? I don't know. Maybe. I don't know.
Well, your lawyers are so far behind, right? It's crazy to me, but I'm still explaining the cloud to a lot of lawyers,
Sure.
like even like senior lawyers in larger firms, right? Like, and I think that's part of labeling. This idea of the cloud is a terrible way to describe what this is, right? Because people, when they think about the cloud, they think about something amorphous and fluffy, right? They're like, that doesn't sound too secure.
That's a great
Well,
description of the cloud, man. It's the least technical explanation of the cloud I've ever. It's fluffy.
yeah, that's
And
what they
I'm
feel
gonna
like.
walk
They're
into the
like,
next tech company I talk to them and say, "Hey, man, you know that fluffy thing you use to store your data?" I
well, so
can't.
the first step I have in that conversation is like, this is not like you reach up into the sky and you can touch your documents, right? There's like a physical endpoint for any data.
Sure.
So you remember how you used to have servers?
Yeah.
Well, somebody else is now maintaining those servers, and instead of buying and owning those servers, you're renting those servers, and that's good because like when you rent a house or an apartment, somebody else has to pay if it breaks. And when I talk to lawyers about it in that sense, they kind of get it, right?
Right.
But yeah, so lawyers are still concerned about security on the cloud. That's definitely an issue I see a lot of.
Mhm.
But the conversations don't really last very long when I tell them about what the actual responsibilities are. So if you look at the ethics rules across pretty much all the jurisdictions, they basically revert to what the state laws are on data security. And essentially what those say is you need a reasonable level of security. So you need your data encrypted, you need password security, you need second factor of authentication. Um, you need to be able to transport data in an effective way, make sure it stays encrypted when you're sharing it with people.
Sure.
All that stuff is easy to do on the cloud, right? Piece of cake, like that's built into a lot of systems. So when I talk to lawyers about that, and I say, look, also if you're like a smaller business and you don't have as much capital as a larger business does, that's accounted for in the laws as well. They say, oh, okay, I get that. I think I can make a system that's reasonably secure. And then you tie that up into a data management document and you're good. Like that's really all you need. And you're also looking at like certain sets of data. So financial data, state issued identification numbers like social security numbers, in some cases, all that stuff requires a higher level of security, but essentially that's encryption as well. So none of this is too hard for law firms.
Right.
And what I tell people is like hire an accountant, hire a consultant rather, hire an IT firm to manage it for you, and then you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah. Now, are they? You look at what Relativity is doing in the market. And they're already beginning to push all of their data to the cloud, whether clients fully realize that or not, right? And then you
Yeah.
see companies like iPro are doing the same thing. It seems to me that once lawyers adopt, the challenge is always, and I'm going to move on after this, but I want you to tell me if I'm right or wrong here. My impression is that the challenge is getting more than one lawyer to adopt the way law firms operate, because they tend to be a little decentralized, and everybody, if you just think about how they go about collections and stuff like that, they don't always have, in mid-sized firms, a particular vendor that just does that for them, right? There are
Right.
hundreds of little vendors depending on who the individual lawyer wants to work with.
Geographically based as well.
Exactly.
Totally. Yeah.
Yep.
Decentralized is the perfect word for it, frankly.
I work under the umbrella of DLA Piper, but I am not DLA Piper, right? I mean, that's kind of thing. Okay, so
Right.
I want to move on, because the technology to me touches on a couple of things that I think are interesting, and one of them, as you and I talked in our prep call the other day, I'm a big believer in the future of work. I'm the member of an organization called Hacking HR. I've been blessed to serve as the Chicago lead this year in that organization. We have about, I think, 150,000 practitioners all across the globe. And so some of the things that we talk about are the workplace of tomorrow and the skills of tomorrow, and what you need to compete for those jobs. So I want you to put on your futurist hat, whatever that looks like. It could be a beanie with a propeller on it. I don't know.
Oh man, I don't have a beanie. That's all right. Next time I'll get one.
I'll send you one. It's okay.
I have a tinfoil hat I can make real quick.
Perfect. Thank you, conspiracy boy. But I want to talk about what skills that lawyers are going to need. What the critical skills of the lawyers of tomorrow are going to need, because I think it's a completely different set of skills than it was even 15 years ago, when hiring and bringing lawyers into law firms was easier, not easy, but easier than it is today.
Yeah, so let's do three, one of which we already kind of talked about a little bit. So tech skills, right? Tech skills that promote efficiency. So, believe it or not, lawyers are actually pretty bad at technology. I think we kind of alluded to that, right? Yeah, I've heard this. It's crazy. Like, there's so few lawyers who even know how to use like PDFs, which is table stakes for me at this point. And the thing that's really interesting is you've now got, in terms of the ethics rules, ABA Model Rule 1.1, which is the first rule in lawyers' ethics sets in every jurisdiction. What's competency for a lawyer? There's a comment that was added to that rule about 2 or 3 years ago, comment 8, which basically says that a lawyer's competency also relates to technology competency, how they use technology, whether they keep that data secure. And that's a big change from what it was before, because lawyer competency was always just like, can they practice substantive law? Now there's this whole other component to it. So it's not like lawyers can avoid this anymore. Sure. And most states, I think maybe all at this point, or the vast majority, have adopted that comment 8. So the other piece of this is like, there's a lot of stuff in the marketplace that's happening that's forcing lawyers to adopt technology. And that's largely because legal consumers, even corporate clients, are just tired of paying huge bills, right? Like, people understand at this point that hourly billing is promoting inefficiency. So let me get this straight. The more hours I work, the more money I can make. What benefit do I have to learn how to run PDF? Sure. Like, if I'm a senior lawyer, I'm like, oh, great. Like, I don't understand this stuff. It'll take me 3 times as long to do it. So I'll make another $1,400 or whatever it is. Right. So you see a lot less tolerance for that than there used to be. So clients now are concerned about like the total cost of legal services, and lawyers who can't deliver legal services efficiently can't deliver total cost numbers to clients. Okay. So I think having the technology skills, the requisite technology skills, even at a baseline level, to be more efficient is going to be the most important thing. And what's really interesting is last year, Clio came out with their legal trends report, which they do every year. 2020 just came out. I'm talking about 2019. They had a stat there that said if a law firm is able to increase their utilization rate by 5%, they make twice as much money every 5 years. And for law firms who are 5% below the industry average in terms of utilization rate, they lose half their revenue every 5 years. And that's just a crazy stat. That tells you that regardless of the other things that lawyers do, the tech they use, how efficient they are, that's really how they make the most money.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, I got two more quick things for you. The other thing I think is financial literacy, right? Like I talked about before. Lawyers generally hate math, but those who have a better handle on finances also do a better job in terms of how much money they make and at building a modern practice, right? So just think of some things we've already talked about, right? Alternative billing mechanisms. The better you have an understanding of your firm finances, the better you can promote alternative pricing. Can you build revenue projections to promote growth? Do you have an understanding of the payment technology that's available to you right now? A lot of lawyers don't. Can you use that to promote the reduction of accounts receivable? And in terms of technology, right? Like if you understand how the cloud works, you understand that that's flattening your costs and eliminating or reducing IT support costs in many ways. So having that level of financial literacy in terms of business management is important.
Sure.
And then just to reiterate what we talked about before, data security. As an attorney, you need to understand how data security works, including in a team environment. And if you can do that, you're reducing the risk you have. Because even if you're never paying a fine for a data breach, like if clients find out about it, if you notify the clients of that, that's a massive reputational hit that you just don't need to take. And I tell law firms, like, talk about how you're tech forward, talk about how you understand data security, and use that to your advantage in terms of marketing. And I think that can be true of big or small firms.
Hmm. Yeah, I think it's anybody who's involved in any kinds of litigation or things that involve personal data, whether that's medical malpractice or whatever, really needs
Yeah.
to pay attention to that. You know, I have a good friend who's an architect for Amazon, and they have a legal services practice. I wonder what happens when that becomes the dominant player in that space, right? I realize that's a little off topic, but
Well, we didn't talk about this, but that's happening. I don't know if
no, I
you've
know.
been
I mean, I
following
know
the
it is.
news.
I
Yeah.
know it is, but they're not there. They're not there yet. And when
Yeah.
they're there,
They will be.
when they're, it becomes like the pill pack of cloud services, right? I mean, you just get,
Right.
here's how much data you need, and we carry so much that nobody can beat us on price. And and Bezos has proved that he's willing to take a loss for decades to win whatever market share he needs to win. So.
Well, it's funny you should mention that. Like the challenge is like you're right. ABS is going to be here. It's already starting to come here in the U.S. I'm talking about,
Mm-hmm.
and lawyers have for so long been focused on competing with other lawyers who are terrible business people, which I think
Sure.
we've gone over already.
Sure.
Now they're going to have to compete with Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
Walmart is going to eat their lunch.
Yeah.
So the fact that lawyers are late adopters, the fact that they only compete with lawyers in barely passable way, like
Mm-hmm.
as soon as these other companies start to infiltrate the market, it's going to be really, really tough to
Mm-hmm.
run a small law firm. And I think lawyers are not prepared for that by any stretch of
At
the
all,
imagination.
at all. And the problem is so much of our market is still driven by people my age and up. And what ends up happening is if you're not an early, at least a personal adopter, to see how
Yeah.
consumer preferences have changed. Because if it changes in how I'm going to buy shoes, it's going to change in how I want to transact law, right? Everything will
Totally.
come to a different place. And that kind of leads me to my next area that I want to talk about. And I know I'm jumping around here a little bit from
Let's
what we had
jump around. I'm good.
discussed, but I think this is really interesting. So that change in law, in how law gets done, in the companies that are going to insert themselves as players in that space, maybe not in terms of actually carrying out litigation, but in terms of the ancillary services that go on around that. That brings me to an idea about the gig economy. Now, the gig economy has had a massive impact on candidate preferences.
Right.
Companies are running to catch up. Legal companies are running to catch up, particularly law firms. You see companies like Disco, like Exact Data, like Relativity. They're all beginning to do things that put them more in line with what the gig economy is like, but still they struggle. Here's what I want to know. People value work in much different ways. The landscape is changing. It used to be that when you hired people for the partner track, you could count on them that a certain percentage of them were going to stay. And that's changed. People on that track don't want to stay more than about 12 or 18 months in bigger firms because they have this mentality of doing work differently. And that brings me to this idea. How could firms, and I'm talking to the big boys out there, how could the big companies modernize what they're doing to attract talent, and what role might gig workers have in the law firm of the future?
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned before, like the age of a lot of people who are decision makers in legal. And I think that's part of the reasons why nobody's on top of these trends, like the gig economy trends. Look, I'm an old man myself, right?
I
I'm
know
like
you are.
42.
I talk about
So
yeah. Okay.
and
Got you beat.
relatively old. But
Okay.
like every committee I'm on, every set of lawyers I talk to who are
Sure.
actual decision makers in the firm, like they have at least 25 years on me.
Yeah.
It's crazy. And I'm not young. Like
Yeah.
when I tell my kids like I'm the youngest guy in the room, they're like, that must be a pretty old room. And I'm like, you're right.
It is. It is. I've been in
But
some of those rooms. Yeah.
the thing that's tough about lawyers is that you're right. Like they still have this notion that we're in like 1800s England, right? Where it's like people work, they work a lot, and their only motivation is money. But if you look at like millennial employees and younger, that's not necessarily their motivation. A lot of those folks, their motivation is flexibility, time off, the ability to value things other than money. And law firms just don't provide that, right? Which is one of the sad reasons that law firms lose so many talented female attorneys, right? Try to have a kid in a big law firm. It's really hard to do, right?
Yep.
So what you're seeing, or at least what I'm seeing, is a lot of attorneys are like breaking out of that track. And even if it's not for forever, they'll take some time and do gig work, right? And simultaneously, there are now a lot of companies out there over like the last 5 or 6 years. I've seen this trend to replacing people at small and large firms in gig work. And the problem was that it used to be that to do this, like you did document review as a temp, right? And every document review is like anathema to lawyers, right? Lawyers are like, hey, oh, this is a document review attorney, not a real lawyer, right? A real lawyer, quote unquote. And lawyers also like to make this thing, there's like a wall between lawyer and non-lawyer, right? And in some cases, actual lawyers don't get to be lawyers either. And I think document review attorneys have had this massive stigma over like the last 10 or 15, 20 years. But now you're seeing this being more acceptable, right? So if I'm a mom who didn't want to work at a big law firm, like I can take some time off, I can do some gig work, I can spend some time raising my kids, and then I can come back and not have this be like, oh, this person is not hireable any longer. And I think that's really valuable. So I've also seen younger attorneys start to value like flexibility of associations, right, at the smaller firm level. So firms are utilizing of counsel relationships to make that happen. And it doesn't necessarily need to be as formalized as it once was. So in general, what I've seen with lawyers is that traditionally they've had like a very black and white notion of what work is. And that's kind of starting to get gray a little bit, which is good. I think ultimately that's a good thing. And so I think the thing about law is that like they come to the trends eventually. It's just 20 years later. So if you wanted to find out what was hot and happening in 2000, look at a law firm today.
Yes, exactly. In fact, I think you and I may have been sitting in a meeting together at Legal Tech with Davis, Wright, and Tremaine in New York City. I think you were there with me, where they introduced their de novo group. Davis, Wright, and Tremaine to me has always been kind of a very forward-looking legal company, and they have an organization that's based in Seattle that does nothing but look at emerging technology. But at the time, 5 years ago or 6 years ago, whenever that was still an anomaly. Right. And now when you look across law firms, big law firms, you're beginning to see things like chief technology officer, chief innovation officer, right? That may or may not have a JD, right? They're actually going outside and bringing in different kinds of skill sets.
Yeah. Two things you talk about there that are really important. One is like non-lawyers willingness to work, lawyers willingness to work with quote unquote non-lawyers again, right? Like anybody who's not a lawyer is like a muggle, like in Harry Potter world, right? So it's not, lawyers are always
it's great that you could sneak in a Harry Potter reference.
I try.
I should have on my Hogwarts t-shirt right now just to make sure everybody knows I'm a complete nerd, right?
Oh, all right. That's good to know. Okay. I should throw in some more of that stuff. Sure. But the deal is that like, there are non-lawyers out there who are smart too. And lawyers are far too reticent to acknowledge that. But I love the fact that smart people in other disciplines are coming into legal. That should be the way it is. And this notion of like new jobs that you talked about is great. So when I talk to lawyers about automation, workflow management, process management, machine learning, AI, they're like, oh, I have to fire everybody. right? No, there's now going to be new jobs for people to have. They're going to be jobs based on technology management. I've seen law firms hire salespeople, right?
Yep.
Because now you can do that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's just like a different way of managing a company, and you're managing it more like a corporation than a law firm. And I think you have that choice right now as lawyers. And as we talked about, in the near term, when alternative business structures are available in the US, it's not a choice anymore. You're going to have to do it to compete.
I think it's going to be interesting because that first batch of Gen Z lawyers that comes out, because there will be some, they are going to be a beast like nobody's ever seen because of the way, and I don't mean that in a disparaging way. I mean, I'm just saying
I agree. It's going to be hard for the other lawyers.
Really difficult because these kids are tech savvy. And you look at what technology is doing. It's put individual lawyers, it's given them the ability to compete for the type of work that they want with firms that are larger. There will be mature organizations that are only going to go to Skadden. But the bulk of the work that's out there isn't stuff that comes from mature firms. Those make up such a small percentage of our economy. When you look at it by number, maybe not by volume or size, by revenue size, but we make money in the mid-market all day long. And I guarantee you, nobody that's going to People Scout or going to some of the other big ones, some maybe Robert Half or Cielo or one of those guys out there, is thinking about coming to me because I'm a smaller player. But in that mid-market space, we'll make money all day long, right? And I think it's the same. I think it's the same in legal. Okay, we only have a couple of minutes left here, so I want to get to kind of our one of the things you touched on, and that is AI and automation and its role in legal. So I think so often one of two things happens when people talk about AI. They either get really, really sweaty and nervous, or their eyes light up because it's something really shiny, right? And what happens is, but in both cases, they're having an overreaction because there's nothing to be that afraid of about general automation. You're using it every day, whether you even realize it or not. If you have Calendly, you're using automation, right? This is just maybe a little bit deeper form. And on the other side of that is, in most cases, what you're dealing with is not really AI as it exists today. It's really clever decision trees. It's really clever stuff, but there's always a human being behind that watching what's going on, particularly in the world of bots. You're making decisions. Did I give the right response? Did I say the right thing, right? And I'd love to get your take on how people in that space are processing it. So walk me through some of the innovations that you're seeing in the legal space that are really changing the way. And I know we talked about it a little bit, but I want to zero in on automation and specific functions of what you're seeing in the marketplace.
Yeah, I think you're right. So I don't think there's like real AI, quote unquote.
Not yet. Legal. I mean, there will be. There will be. But...
I agree. But I think there's a couple reasons for that. Like, one is like there's not enough structured data sets in legal right now. So if you're trying to pull data sets from law firms and train AI on that, law firms are terrible at keeping records, right? So if I took all the data of a case management software system and tried to organize it, probably the only thing I'm going to be able to organize is like the time and billing information, because that's what they care enough about.
Right.
So I think creating these other structured data sets about things that law firms do, interactions they have, is going to be the hardest part. And I think that's going to take a little while to do. And then there's a high cost for this too. So you're talking like smaller firms, mid-market firms, they're not going to want to do that. They're not going to want to pay for that, frankly. So innovation. So I will tell you that like the innovation I see in machine learning and AI, like the real place where I see that happening is legal research companies, believe it or not. I think what they're doing is pretty fascinating, and I think that's the best place to look for where the future is going to go on this. So I'll just give a few examples, like Fastcase. If you've heard of that.
Good guy.
Ed Walters. Yeah, Ed Walters, good friend of mine. He's really smart.
Good guy.
What's interesting about Fastcase is, so Westlaw needed to process like a lot of cases, and they needed to write head notes, and they needed to give people flags on what was going on in those cases, so they wouldn't have to spend all the time reading them themselves. Westlaw's solution was, let's hire 20,000 lawyers to do this. Again, we got the lawyer non-lawyer dichotomy, right? So let's hire these people who are insanely expensive to do this work. The overhead for that is just massive. So Ed said, let's write algorithms to figure out what the logic is in these cases. And Fastcase a while back came out with something called a bad law bot, right? Which is using algorithms to figure out, is this case law not precedential anymore? And
Wow.
instead of hiring like 2,000, 3,000 people to figure that out, he's got one program that does it.
Wow.
And that's really smart. And I think that's one of the ways that Fastcase was able to catch up with those big firms so quickly. The other stuff I see that's really cool. So Westlaw just came out with something called Quick Check, for example. So what that is you've got your brief, you upload it into their system, and then they've spent years reviewing how highly qualified veteran attorneys research in legal, because they've got all the people researching on their system, right? And so this system will tell you, okay, you're missing precedent here. This is an argument you could have made. And it's pulling that from data sets that lawyers have worked on, right? So now you can put your brief in and you can say, oh, I should have added that case, or I should have made this argument. And you
Does it go out and review case law to pull that stuff in?
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
So it's really cool. It's a really cool product. And then the other piece of it that's great, which lawyers like, because if there's anything that lawyers like more than identifying who's a lawyer and who's a non-lawyer, lawyers also like to get other lawyers and stick it to them, right? So what you can do is you can grab your
bunch for sure.
It is a lot of type A personalities.
Yes.
So you can grab your opponent's brief, drop it into Quick Check, and then it will say, oh, your opponent should have made this argument, and you can make this counter argument, or they forgot this precedent, which is arguing against something that they've said. And that's just like fantastic. And it's part of
incredible.
It's part of the Westlaw suite. And then you've got services like Ross Intelligence, which is using machine learning to do basic searches that associates would do. So the whole thesis behind that product is, okay, you don't have to hire an associate or waste an associate's time doing basic research. You're just pulling the basic research from the system. That's the best place in legal, I think, where AI and machine learning is happening at a high level, and largely because they spend a lot of money on it. Like Westlaw has a lot of money to spend on experts.
Sure. But that idea of hiring a bunch of people, it goes back to the idea that most of the cost, when I got into the legal space way back in the day, was Xantaz and Autonomy in Boston. Everything was a pass-through, so nobody cared, right? It was all, it's going to get billed. So, and then corporations got smart, and they went, well, discovery is the most expensive thing I have in my line items. So how do we reduce the cost there? And then you saw, companies like Relativity really jump up and offer different services. You saw people out there applying certain things of machine learning and OCR to be able to scan documents and pick out relevant documents quickly. And now some of the things that you used to take 100 people in a room going through box after box after box of paper, you can do with a couple folks, right?
Right.
And it's changed that whole doc review market. Man, I have really enjoyed this conversation. I could literally do this all day. Yeah, no, we need to do, well, yeah, relatively, right? I mean, you have to talk to me for 40 minutes, but I want to do this again at some point and get you back on and have a conversation. I think it could be, really fun. If folks want to get in touch with you, if they like what you're talking about and they'd like to engage you for either Red Cave or the software work that you do, the bots that you guys develop over at Gideon, how would they get in touch with you? What's the best way for them to reach you?
Website, probably the easiest way to do it. For consulting services, you're looking at redcavelegal.com.
Okay.
And then for I have a software company also called Gideon, which you referenced, which sells website chat for law firms. The website for that is gideon.legal.
Okay. Awesome. Jared, thanks so much, man. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I had a blast.
Pal. Have a great day. I'll talk to you soon.
Take care. You too.
Bye now. All right, well, that's going to do it for us today. I hope that you found this peek into the legal industry to be really interesting. Jared is a guy that really has his thumb on the pulse of what's going on in that space. And the legal industry in general is going through a huge disruptive transformation with the advent of new technologies and changes in workforce preference. And I think he was really able to give us a peek into what that looks like. But I think the lessons he talked about about preparing the workforce to be more competitive tomorrow or applicable regardless of where you might work. Now, if you'd like to connect with him, it's really easy. You can find him on LinkedIn, Jared Correia, or you can find him at Red Cave Law Consulting online, or Gideon Legal online. Those are his two companies. They are really interesting things that he is working on, and I would suggest that you connect with him, particularly if you're in that space. If you want a good listen in the legal space, listen to his podcast. It's the Legal Toolkit podcast, and that's on the Legal Talk Network. Now, if you like what we did here today and you want to stay up to date, then like, subscribe, and share, and turn on the notification buttons so you never miss any new content from us. Until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, and vote.